Hello, my name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune, and we could say that this is episode 1 of season 2 of this podcast. So if you were waiting for this for a few months, I appreciate and thank you for your patience in waiting for this. A lot of things have happened since the last episode, but the one that I want to talk to you about today is my debut recital at Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks ago. And what you were just listening is a recording not from that recital, but from the same program that I performed a week earlier in my hometown of Monterrey, Mexico. And the specific pieces that you were hearing were Vals Allemand and Eusebius from Schumann's Carnival. And I will tell you why I'm playing this for you to start this episode. Because in general, I will talk today about a lot of things regarding piano recitals and why I chose this program and how performing this in public felt like, or how performing in public feels like the piano as opposed to conducting a symphony or conducting an opera or accompanying singers or many of the other musical things that I do on stage. So I want to talk about all of this in no particular order, also why I chose the program. But this particular moment, I chose it because it's very special, and I don't even know if people fully register it as such, the way I register it. And this is because of a couple of reasons. Number one, as a pianist, you don't really get to practice in the space in which you're going to perform. So in reality, there's an element of surprise for yourself as a performer when you get to the hall for the first time, when you get to try the piano for the first time. Maybe you are given the chance to have a dress rehearsal that same day. Sometimes if you're performing with an orchestra or something like that, you get to try the piano a couple of days before the day of the show. But both in my hometown in Monterrey and at Carnegie Hall, I was only given the piano the day of the show. So at that moment, and this is common for pianists all over the world, unless you can carry your piano with yourself, like some great pianists in history have done, such as Vladimir Horowitz or Christian Zimmermann, really you just have to adapt to what you're given. Normally, if it's a good hall, it's going to be a good piano, if it's a prestigious hall, so to speak. And even if you were to carry your own instrument, it's not the same to play in your own living room, or if you have, I don't know, a lot of money and you happen to have like a big auditorium in your own house, maybe you have an acoustic resembling that of a concert hall, but most likely you don't. Most likely you only get to practice in the acoustics of the concert hall the day of the performance. And the feeling is certainly different. The reverberation is different. The kind of feedback you get in your ears is much different. And therefore, you may have to adapt your sensation because the amount of, I don't know, let's say force, or the amount of energy you put in may have to feel different, and this can be risky when you don't have experience. When you are just starting, it's can be a moment of panic to get into a hall for the first time, a big hall where all the sound, rather than bouncing around in your living room and coming to your ears, or in your practice room coming to your ears very powerfully, it goes out on the audience, right? So you start banging, you start like playing loudly, you start feeling that the piano is maybe a bit heavy, or tons of things, right? Your technique is like different. So this you eventually overcome with experience. And in my case, it brings actually a sense of excitement because both in Monterrey, but especially at Carnegie Hall, when you have such a beautiful acoustic and when you have such a beautiful instrument, the reality is that most likely you will sound better than in your own living room or practice room. So this is an opportunity to finally see or hear all these ideas that you have conceived in your head, in your soul, see them finally materialized closer to what you imagined. How does this relate to what I played for you in the beginning? there is this, in the Schumann Carnival, I chose it because this is a piece that I studied more than 15 years ago. This was a piece that I was preparing for my final year of master's in music at Manhattan School of Music. I love long pieces. I love the big romantic pieces, such as the Schumann Carnival. I played the Chopin Third Sonata, the Rachmaninoff Second Sonata, the Mussorgsky pictures at an exhibition. I love long form pieces because it feels like very epic. You can take the audience through like a movie, right? Plus, it's very practical for a recital because you grab one big piece and that pretty much takes up a whole half of a concert. So in deciding this program, I decided to revisit the Carnival by Schumann because I haven't really performed this piece in public ever since my recital, my graduation recital at Manhattan School of Music. I've performed many other recitals ever since, obviously, and released albums and added so much repertoire so many pieces to my repertoire. But I did not revisit the Schumann Carnival for a long time, so I thought maybe this is a good opportunity to present something that is both new and old. And why hadn't I played it in such a long time? Because I don't think I was successful back then when I studied it. I couldn't understand it very well. I knew I wanted to play it. I knew it was a piece that I loved. But at that moment, at the stage that I was going through musically, going through Manhattan School of Music and sort of coming to terms with my own musicality, with what does it mean to suddenly be like a star in Mexico and then feeling like you are at the very bottom of the pyramid at the school, at Manhattan School of Music, to figure out what does it mean to play at this level. Do you have to like do things differently than you were doing at home? Do you have to sort of curtail your musicality or your musical ideas to the needs, so to speak, or what the expectations of jury members or faculty members or juries in competitions, etc. So there's always a sort of existential musical crisis that I believe a lot of young artists go through when they go through school, and especially through a high-level school such as Manhattan School of Music. So at that time, I feel like my creativity and my imagination for the piano was sort of inhibited, especially for a piece like Schumann's Carnival that requires so much imagination and so much color. I was much more comfortable with pieces like a Chopin sonata or like a Rachmaninoff sonata, where I felt like maybe at least they had some structure, like a classical structure to abide by. So, and I remember very well, I recorded one of my auditions where I was playing the Schumann Carnival, and I played all the way from the beginning through this moment when I get to Eusebius. Eusebius is the introvert side of Schumann's personality. And when you get to this moment, the music changes. And he writes very strangely, where he writes these bars, which are in 2/4, so two beats per bar. But he writes 7 notes in each bar on the right hand. Obviously, mathematically, you cannot fit 7 notes in 2 beats. So either you calculate it very strictly or you sort of go by feeling. But then it's not like every phrase is every bar, but the phrases are like 4 bars. So really you have like 28 notes that you sort of have to fit into a phrase. And you don't know if you're supposed to do this slower or faster or anything. So I did not understand this piece back then. And I remember when I listened to that audition, they were talking about more than 15 years ago, I got bored and I was like, no wonder they stopped me right there. This is a moment when you can tell what is the imagination of a pianist, what do they bring to the table, and I didn't bring anything. So I completely discarded this piece. I was very well aware that I was not ready at that time. So I bring it back for my recital and I start listening to several other recordings and I get fascinated by Rachmaninoff's recording of Schumann's Carnival. Back in the day, all I could absorb from his recording was that it was very fast, and it's famously fast. It famously lasts like 25 minutes while most other recordings of the Carnival last 30 minutes. That's a big big difference. So this time I was listening the way you're supposed to listen to great artists, which is don't go for the speed, for the tempo. When you don't have any musical ideas, the first thing you hear is, of course, whether something is fast or slow. The same thing when somebody doesn't have many musical ideas to bring to the table, they either do something like very fast or they do something very slow, as if that is a musical idea in and of itself. The reality is that tempo, meaning that the speed or that the beat at which, the rate of the beats at which you choose to perform a piece, should be the final stage and tempo, like each beat carries within itself all the other musical ideas that have already been worked on, which is like the phrasing, the breathing between the phrases, the colors, the changes of colors, the changes of dynamics, the different textures, the different voices. There's so many things that can be worked on, and at the end, in order to fit them all and present them coherently, then you sort of start coming into an idea of what the tempo should be for this piece, for yourself, for your own ideas. Same thing goes with singers. One particular aria will have a completely different tempo depending on who the singer is, and even on the day in which they're singing this, because we are living organisms, so our bodies change, and at the end this is a very physical process. So I'm just giving you a tip on what to listen for when you listen to great interpreters perform any music, right? So if the first thing you're listening to is whether something is faster than you do it or slower than you do it, you're not listening to the right things. And if you want to, in a way, imitate what a great artist does, it's okay to imitate just to learn, right? Just to learn something about yourself. But don't go for the tempo, because if that's all you're imitating, then you're just grabbing the vessel, but you're grabbing it empty. The tempo at the end is the vessel for all these musical ideas. So listen to the musical ideas. Listen to what the performer is doing with the pedal, with the left hand, with the colors, with the singing, with breathing in between phrases, with changes of tone. So, and once you get to that, if you can imitate that, most likely you will have to do it in the same tempo as that performer. So I listened to Rachmaninoff do Eusebius this moment, and I finally got it. And I don't know if I play it like him. I don't think it's possible to really play it like anyone. But the delicacy with which he plays it, almost like a child looking out at a window, at the leaves falling, or like raindrops, delicate raindrops falling, and having a certain nostalgia or melancholy. To me, that nailed it. And I was like, I wanna play it like that. And in order to create this color, you really need a very good instrument, and you really need a good hall for the acoustics. So even though I knew what kind of color I wanted to get out of the piano, I was never sure if it was gonna come out until I got to the stage. So when I get to that moment, it is a surprise for me as much as it is for the audience. And I believe that sometimes I can feel what the audience is feeling. I don't know if all performers can do that. I don't know if it's a placebo effect, that maybe I'm just projecting into them what I'm feeling myself. Impossible to know, obviously, unless maybe later you poll each audience member. But at that moment, both in Monterrey and at Carnegie Hall, I believe I could feel the audience sort of stop a little bit and realize that I'm presenting with them a completely new color that I hadn't presented to them throughout the whole beginning of the evening. Because before playing Schumann's Carnival, I did Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, the transcription by Ferruccio Busoni. So this is a piece originally for organ that Busoni transcribes for the piano, and it's a very grandiose piece. And even though it has a lot of different colors and a lot of different textures, and it occupies a whole range of the piano. It's a spectacular, majestic piece, which sort of shows the possibilities of the piano, and I thought it was a great piece to start the recital with. You don't get that sort of delicacy that you find eventually in Schumann's Carnival in Eusebius. And Schumann's Carnival starts also like very joyful, very splashy, very spectacular, and very romantic, with a lot of like different colors and all these sort of like display of virtuosity and joy. It's a parade at the end, it's a carnival. So when you get to Eusebius, you hear something for the first time that you hadn't heard at all. So 20 minutes into a recital, or maybe 15 minutes into a recital, you get surprised. You get, wow, there's a whole other universe of color that can be created in this evening. I felt that, and it made me happy, because at that moment, I felt like I had finally overcome the moment of 17 years earlier when I got to Eusebius in the Schumann Carnival and things just got boring. So that was a moment that I was proud of myself. And I believe the audience enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it very much, because it's a beautiful moment that I was finally able to convey. So how do I choose the program for this recital? I already gave you some hints. I love big pieces, so I knew I wanted to do Schumann's Carnival, because other pieces I already had performed in public, like Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, or Chopin's Third Sonata, or Rachmaninoff's Second Sonata. I have a recording of it, on the streaming services. So I knew I wanted to do something new, but I didn't have the time to learn something new. So that's why I brought Schumann's Carnival back and tackled it, and like, either I solved this once or never again, So I think it was finally resolved. I wanted to start with something like the Toccata and Fugue. I think Bach is he has always been a great composer to start with. It's risky. It's very risky, because Bach has this relentlessness to his music. It's the rhythm just keeps going and keeps going. There's no moment to stop, and especially when you have a fugue, or where you have polyphony, meaning like many voices. So with like your 2 hands and 10 fingers, you suddenly are playing 2 voices, 3 different voices going in different directions. It becomes very difficult for your brain, and especially for your memory. So if you're playing 3 different voices and you have a steady rhythm that doesn't stop, that doesn't give you time to breathe or to gather yourself, if you make a mistake, or if you forget one thing here, one little thing here, one little there, it is very risky, because the whole thing can grind to a halt. And this is risky, especially at the beginning of a concert. That's why Bach is usually requested in competitions, in juries for schools, etc. You see what a pianist is made of, because can they control their nerves? Do they have good memory? Can they perform under pressure? So I wanted to tackle this challenge, and the Toccata and Fugue in D minor is a piece that I have loved since I was a kid, because it was the opening piece in Disney's Fantasia. Of course, this was with orchestra. I love that piece ever since. I think it's perfect in every way. So I learned it for this recital. It's the only one piece that I fully learned from scratch just to perform it, and I was happy about it. So that was my first half, a European first half with Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor and with Schumann's Carnival, this almost 30-minute piece, collection of vignettes of different characters in Schumann's life, like Chopin, like Paganini, like his girlfriend at the time, Ernestine von Fricken, he calls Estrella, and also Clara Wieck, who would become Clara Schumann. At that time she was 12, but she would become Schumann's wife many years later, and he portrays her as Chiarina, little Chiara, little Clara. There's also fictional characters from Commedia dell'arte like Pierrot and Arlequin and Colombina, Pantalon. There's also, of course, himself as Eusebius that I've talked to you about, and Florestan, the opposite, the extrovert, There's also like butterflies, there's a confession of love, there's all these different characters. It's a lot of fun to perform this piece once you get into Schumann's mindset, which is, I'm not presenting to you a sonata, I'm not presenting to you a symphony, I'm presenting you a whole universe, a whole rainbow of different colors, of different characters that don't even fit into the same categories. You have real people, you have the different versions of himself, you have fictional characters, you have situations, you have butterflies, and at the end they all come together. The David's Bundler, the League of David, David the one who fights against Goliath, right? So he sees himself and his friends as this league that come to fight the Philistines. So he comes to fight in defense of art and music. And this is beautiful because the way he represents the Philistines is with like an old, like 16th century, or 17th century piece at the end. So he's making fun of the conservative faction of the era, people that were very bound by the rules, by the way things used to be done in the past, by the people who were scared of where music was moving forward, by the people who were scared of new ideas. And all of that resonates a lot with me if you know anything about me. So this felt in a way very, very personal on the idea of like, let's march and let's bring all these ideas forward. Like, it's not about the ideas of the past, it's not about the rules that or strictures that bound us, it's about how we can expand ourselves, right, and bring everyone together. So that's what, to me, the carnival is about. Now, second half of the program, this is where the big challenge came, because a great friend, a very inspiring friend, and I will tell you who she is. She's Catherine Pizzaroni. She asked me about the program. She's a wonderful friend who has been in touch with so many great artists throughout her life. So she knows very well the process of artists. And when I just asked her opinion on the recital, I was planning on playing a Beethoven sonata and I don't know what else. She's like, I'm sorry, but already a bunch of European composers coming from you, somebody who has like all this diverse life in music, you have to present something that's much more risky, much more yourself, whatever that means. So I took this advice to heart, and I was like, okay, let me present something that really conveys who I am, and that also shows some sort of fearlessness, or at least let's not be coy, right? Even if I'm playing at Carnegie Hall, well, at the end it's like it's all or nothing, right? So I decided to completely change my idea of the program and then dedicated the second half fully to the Americas, to the continent of America. And I programmed 3 pieces. One was a suite from West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein. Another one was the Sonata No. 1 by Alberto Ginastera, or Ginastera, the way he liked to call himself. And Moncayo's Huapango, which is like the second national anthem of Mexico. Now, if you were not at the recital and you haven't heard much of it, and if you know these pieces, you might be wondering, well, West Side Story or Moncayo's Huapango are not written for the piano. That is true. The arrangements for piano were made by myself. This was the daring part of the program, plus the show a little bit of my own life as my own, so to speak, craft as an artist, because I'm not just a pianist, I'm also or a full-on concert pianist, I'm also a conductor. I work a lot with opera, with voice, and I have played a lot of transcriptions in my life. Actually, the 2 albums that I have released are pretty much dedicated to transcriptions. So it only made sense to bring this to life. The Bernstein I had made back in 2018. I have never presented it in public because I still have to write it down. But the Bernstein Foundation, the Bernstein organization, gave me permission to perform the world premiere of my arrangement at Carnegie Hall with 2 percussion players. So again, this is a bit pushing the envelope. This is a piano recital, but I invite 2 percussion players because this is how I imagined that this arrangement should be. So I presented my suite from West Side Story by Bernstein. And Moncayo's Huapango, same thing. This is composed for orchestra. There has never been a transcription for piano, and I think there should be. So back in the pandemic in 2020, I made it. I made it myself, and it took me a whole month. It doesn't sound like a lot, but especially at that time when there was nothing else happening, I dedicated every single day for a whole month to write it down. And I'm proud of it. I think it's very successful, and I think it's gonna be part of the repertoire of pianists, especially in Mexico, and hopefully out there in the world too. So I was very proud to present these 2 transcriptions or arrangements of mine at Carnegie Hall, and also to present Ginastera's Sonata No. 1. Now, Why did I choose these particular pieces? It may be enough to just say, well, these are my arrangements, but there is something personal to me about each of them. In the case of Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein is probably the biggest, if not one of the biggest inspirations in my life as an artist, as a full artist, because he represents that which I've strived to become or to emulate over the last 20 years of my career, which is this full, complete artist who is not just a pianist. He was, of course, we know everything about him, conductor, composer, educator, incredibly smart, incredibly eloquent when talking, and always also pushing the envelope, moving things forward, presenting new ideas in a digestible way, in a way that people could absorb, treating people as if they can absorb all these messages. I like very much the idea of talking to people at a level of eloquence and intelligence that assumes that your audience is smart, and your audience appreciates what you have to say and can understand your ideas, and you can share the ideas and they can absorb them. So Bernstein is someone that I absolutely admire. And to me, West Side Story is just a masterpiece that is so ahead of its time when dealing with things like immigration and race and division and all of and capitalism, and I love to live in America, and the Jets and the Sharks. All of this that's in the music to me is very political, right? And it's very forward looking, it's very daring, and to me that's something that connects very much with myself and with what I think our job as artists is. We're not political spectators in the world. We are very much in it. We are political actors. Through art, we convey ideas, and we convey ideas in a way that people can, from all walks of life, can be exposed to them. So I believe artists have a huge responsibility in our world, a huge responsibility to speak up and to talk about our convictions beyond our art, beyond just music. Of course, this is risky, very, very risky, and the first instinct is always to protect your career, protect your interests, and it's very tempting to say, well, the musician is just like stands outside at the margins of all of these discussions, of all of these debates. That may be true, but it is certainly not true for me. So this is part of why West Side Story is such a wonderful piece, besides it being incredible, beautiful music and fun music. Now, moving forward in the recital, there were two things that really touched me recently. One is when Leonard Bernstein talks about music from Latin America. And he explains this in one of his young people's concerts. And he was saying how, yes, Latin America, first of all, the name, he has a problem with the name Latin America because, of course, it comes from the fact that the America was colonized by these countries who spoke the Romance languages. So those countries that like Spain, like Italy, like Portugal, whose language derives from Latin. So that's why Latin America. But this only conveys one part of the story. Of course, the other part of the story, which is, he says, equally, if not more important, is the natives of America and also Africa, all the people who were brought as slaves. So you have all this conflation of cultures that eventually spills over into the music that we call classical. So even in classical music, the composers from Latin America bring all this richness of culture, not just the European, but also the African and the Native American. This is coming from Bernstein himself, right? So I found this a beautiful thing for him to say back in the 60s. And beyond that, he also said something very important, something that connects with my own understanding of Ginastera's sonata. And this is that when we think of Latin American music, we think a lot of rhythms. We think of the music of the natives, we think of the music of Africa. So we think a lot of rhythm. And sure, there's a big rhythmic aspect to it, but that is not all. There is so much more. There's also singing, there's also colors, there's also phrases, there's all the things that make music, all the elements of music are there. So if we're gonna focus only on rhythm, we're losing a lot of the full spectrum of the music. Now, why is this important? Because the Ginastera Sonata is another piece that I played in my graduation recital back in Manhattan School of Music. And this is a piece that I was convinced at that time that I could actually do well, and I believe I did it well. I never really had the opportunity to present it in public beyond my master's in music, except for a few competitions. A couple of them I was not even able to present it because I didn't get to the round in which I was supposed to play it. And then eventually I moved on to other repertoire. I started studying with my teacher Oksana Yablonskaya, etc. So I never again revisited the Ginastera Sonata, even though I knew I could probably do a good job with it. Even then, when I would perform it for my teacher, James Tocco, even though he gave so many great insights on it and he encouraged me to play this piece, he did say one time, like, Abdiel, if one day I want to learn this piece, I think I will have to take a lesson from you. And that was a beautiful thing to say. That was after I had taken many lessons with him and he had given me very many insights, even though admitting himself that he didn't know the piece that well. So when I would play it for others and when I would listen to recordings, everybody would focus on the rhythmic aspect of it. And yes, the piece has a lot of like composite rhythms, like 5/8 and 7/8 and 9/8. So you feel like you have to be very strict about them when you start in the first movement. And the second movement is like one continuous like rhythm in 6/8. You have to pop, 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 pop. So most people try to just do that. And the last movement is just a dance, right? In composite rhythm, you know. So I would get very conflicted because when I play this piece, if you really try to play it or in rhythm, even physically, it may not be possible. There's just too many jumps. But also, when you try to play everything strictly in rhythm, like as if having a metronome, you don't have the chance to breathe. You don't have the chance to create differences in color. You don't have the chance to present differences in texture. So you have to break that rhythmic pattern in order to do these things. And for that, you sometimes look for permission and you don't find it, right? Because you don't have Ginastera by your side to tell you that, yes, that's allowed. And all you hear from everyone else is like, well, this is Latin American music. You have to be very present, you know, the rhythmic aspect of it, which is what makes it different or unique. And I think there is a form of patronizing, you know. I used to, this may be very strong words, but I sometimes talk about racism in music, where we see certain music as different than others. In this case, it's very hidden, but to say that this particular music only has rhythm is to really strip it of everything that makes it special. In reality, you could say the same thing about Schubert or about Wagner or about Liszt. You know, Hans von Bülow famously said, we've talked about Hans von Bülow in previous episodes, in the beginning there was rhythm. Yes, rhythm is everything, but in the sense in which I talked to you at the beginning of this episode, in the sense that each beat, like our heartbeats, carries all of our information within it. So our breathing, how are we feeling at the moment, who we are, our weight, our, whatever we ate, everything within us at this particular moment is then carried on by our heartbeats. The same thing in music. Yes, rhythm is everything, but only because of everything else that is encompassed in every single beat. All the phrasing, all the colors, all the textures, all the feelings, all the emotions. So to say that a music is only rhythm is a way of looking down at that music and not realizing the full richness of it. And this is something that is very common with the art of Latin America. I remember famously, thinking, what is the difference between what we call artisany, when you go to Mexico City and you have these people in the streets selling you what they made with their hands, and they painted by hand and they sell it for like $1 or like $2, and they call them artisans. And people come and then they negotiate with them. Oh, this is $2. Can you make it $1? Or what if I buy 2 of them? Can you make it? And they will give you a good price. Whereas what we call art ends up being auctioned to the highest bidder at Sotheby's in New York, right, or in Paris. What is the difference between art and artisany? It's just racism, right? So the same thing happens in music. Am I supposed to only play Latin American music because I am from Latin America? Sure, there's an aspect where there's a lot of context that we absorb as we're growing up that it would be difficult for someone who didn't grow up there to absorb. But just like I can absorb Mozart and all his context if I put enough work on it, anybody can absorb the culture of Mexico if they put enough work and respect for it and devotion for it. So, having said all of this, I believe Ginastera is a masterpiece that besides the rhythmic aspect of it, it has all these other like different colors, all this universe, all this phrasing, all these wonderful things where you can actually make music the same way you would do it in a Rachmaninoff sonata or in a Prokofiev sonata or Chopin, where the author doesn't write certain things because the author takes it for granted that you as a musician would look at a place and be like, okay, I need to breathe here. I need to do a little pause here. I need to change the atmosphere in order to tell the story. So this is the work that 15, 17 years later, after having played this piece back in the day with a lot of emphasis in the rhythm, and I played it well because at the end it's a very spectacular piece. Now it was different. I felt like I could breathe with it. I felt like I had the maturity to know that I didn't have to have Ginastera by my side to give me permission to take some liberties with his music. I knew that I could do it because I understand this music, because I have absorbed it, and because I know that this music is much richer than just its rhythms. Beyond that, I went into a whole story on what I imagine is behind Ginastera Sonata, and this may or may not be true. But I had a flashback from my teacher, James Tocco, when I was studying Prokofiev's 7th sonata with him. And in the second movement, he tells me, at the end of it, there's a moment where he's like, this is like desolation. This feels like post-apocalyptic at the end of nuclear war. And to me, this connected with the 3rd movement of Ginastera Sonata. And then one thought followed the other. Prokofiev's sonatas are these war sonatas composed during World War II that for the first time humanity is faced with the possibility of their own annihilation. 10 years later, Ginastera composes this sonata, and I thought, what if he was trying to do the same thing? But if he's conveying the Latin American experience, then we're talking about not the prospect of annihilation, we're talking about the reality of annihilation that happened with the conquest and with the colony. So to me, each of these movements represents that. The first movement is very warlike. It's very aggressive. The second movement is this warm that starts like darkly seeping in through everything. It seeps into the water, it seeps into the land, it seeps into your mind insidiously. And then the third movement, we find this desolation, this devastation. But what was very inspiring to me is the fourth movement, because it says ostinato, which is obstinate. To me, it strikes a note of defiance, of saying, we are still here, that dances come back, the rhythms come back, the indigenous, the native dances come back, and the cries come back, and at the end there seems to be victory. And to me this is very hopeful, because it represents the fact that we're still here, we're not going anywhere. I shared some of this in the recital, but there's something personal to it, because recently, I'm talking about sometime in the last few years, I did the genetic testing of 23andMe, and sure enough, I am 50% indigenous Mexican, 50% European, coming from the Spanish Peninsula, literally the story of the conquest of Mexico. And this is very humbling, and this is very sobering to realize that there is native blood in me, that when I'm looking at myself in the mirror, I am seeing the native faces of my ancestors as much as I'm seeing the European faces of my ancestors. So that is very much the meaning of we're still here. We didn't go anywhere. You tried to destroy us. Well, we mixed ourselves. We found a way to survive, and now to hopefully thrive. So any attempt at removing anyone it's futile, right? Because that's a human spirit. This is as relevant today as it has been always. And finally, this brings me to the last piece, which was Huapango, and Moncayo's Huapango, where you have this other way of telling the Latin American story. Rather than through a narrative, the way I saw it with Ginastera Sonata, this is through just presenting our songs and our rhythms and putting them in the music. And this is something that I said in the recital on where, when I was growing up, talking again about racism in music, about seeing certain music as more elevated than others. And this is very common. Maybe people listening to this today may not believe so or want to believe it, but it is a thing of looking at the music, the high art, high culture of the Europeans, and thinking that somehow this is more elevated than the music of the natives or the music of the people, the folk music or anything like that, right? So there's always this aspirational element on playing classical music, that you're like, okay, even though my background is this, but I feel like I could aspire to that. And maybe there's something good to be said about that, on the human ambition and the spirit of like wanting to overcome your own obstacles and wanting to become better at what you do, right? And absorbing maybe what you see as the epitome of music making or piano technique or anything like that. At the end, the piano is an instrument that was brought to us. So if I happen to be playing the piano, I want to become the best at it, so I need to absorb the music of the masters like Beethoven and Liszt. That doesn't mean that it's in any way better than the music of my ancestors, right? So rather than thinking that putting this music, the music of the natives, the folk music, putting it in the concert halls of the world in symphonic form, rather than thinking that we're somehow elevating that native music or for music, now I see it the other way around. We are the ones elevating the concert halls of the world by enriching it, by offering this gift of saying there's much more in the world. Now that you discovered our land, and people are still discovering it, people are still realizing how incredible the music is in Mexico or in Latin America, how incredible the food is, how incredible the culture is, the people, the humor, the way of talking, the wit. There's a lot of things that we have to offer, and that we have to offer proudly. And of course, all cultures should have the same sort of pride on what makes us differently. And that's our land, our connection to the land. That's where our language comes, our food comes, our music comes, and our connection to each other. So presenting Huapango and all these beautiful, wonderful dance-like rhythms at Carnegie Hall, to me, is a source of pride of saying maybe I'm doing good for my ancestors. Maybe some of them maybe had very romantic, beautiful stories, right, in my past, but maybe some of them did not, right? This idea of the native and the European, there's a power dynamic there, and we don't know exactly how many stories are behind us that may not have been fully beautiful or romantic, that resulted in offspring after offspring that eventually led to myself, to my own existence. So I believe there's an element of survival in our past. I believe there's an element of resilience, and we're still here. And to me, presenting this at Carnegie is part of that history of resilience and survival and overcoming obstacles. I finished with a couple of anchors. One was Adios Nonino by Astor Piazzolla, Argentinian composer, and this I chose it just because it felt appropriate. Life is full of goodbyes. That has a lot to do with my life recently, so it just felt appropriate to do this. Nostalgia. Piazzolla is very similar to Rachmaninoff in that, like nobody else, he is able to convey melancholy and nostalgia in music. And finally, I closed with Porgy and Bess by Gershwin, and this was an arrangement by my teacher, Gerardo Gonzalez, in Monterrey. And I've talked about him previously. I feel like in one episode I'm gonna dedicate it fully to him because he deserves it. But suffice it to say that I think he may have been happy that I closed my performance at Carnegie Hall with an arrangement made by him. And none other than Gershwin, the other ultimate quintessential New Yorker. So I'm gonna leave you now with the last movement, the finale of Ginastera's sonata. And this is the moment, I believe, of triumph. This is the moment of resilience, of defiance. And it's all wrapped in the Latin American rhythms of the gauchos in Argentina and even and much more, you know. So I hope you enjoy it. It's a spectacular piece. All of this is going to be on YouTube from a recital in Monterrey. And hopefully I will get to release some of this in actual recordings for streaming services some point in the very, very near future. My name is Abdiel Vázquez. This is Maestro in Tune. See you in a couple of weeks.